Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Online Test Conf Day 2. We are ready to start our next session. Nikhil, are you with us?
Hi, Joe.
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing good. Thanks, Joe.
Excellent. So I will stop my sharing so that you can start your sharing. And that way we can take it from there. By the way, you can share your camera if you want as well. It's optional, but all good. And just a quick intro. By the way, once you share, then I will be able to see your screen. Um, Nikhil has been over 18 years working in a bunch of very interesting companies, TiVo, Visa, Intuit. Today, he's a group leader on Gibraltar, India, working for Prudential Financials, if I'm not mistaken, and you will be able to correct me if I'm wrong. Um, and what we liked about this session specifically is that it's trying to provide more concrete ideas about what does it mean to do a QA transformation or the shift right, shift left, stuff like that, so that people can actually do something concrete about it. So, Nikhil, we thank you very much for taking the time to do the session, and that's it. You have the floor.
All right. So you can see me, Joe, and you can see my slides.
We see everything A-okay.
Perfect. Sounds good. Thank you, one. Thank you, OTC, for this great opportunity. Thank you, Joe and Mayan, for reaching out to me. It's been a while that I have spoken in a conference, and I have been more on the backside of the conferences which are happening in India, mostly reviewing the technical papers and as well as part of the steering committees. But I thought since this online world gives me an opportunity to present from my home, so I think and reach out to the entire world. So I thought, let me just get back to the presentation and then start, talking about things that I have done. Right. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are joining from. Really appreciate your time and hope you and your family are staying safe during this pandemic time. Okay, let's get started. All right. So a little bit about me. Joe has already mentioned I am part of Gibraltar, India, which is a subsidiary of Prudential Incorporation US. It is in the finance and the insurance domain. So my work experience has been working on various domains, including insurance, payment, finance. I spent some time with Visa, spent some time with Intuit, the social media management, as well as the telecom and the gaming companies. I worked initially during my career with Motorola, working on their 2.5 and 3G testing part of it, and then work on a card Indian startup with a gaming company. My education background, I hold the Bachelor of Engineering degree and also completed my executive management program from one of the B schools in Bangalore. Initial my career, I was taking care of quality, then moved to test automation, and now taking care of the DevOps team, including all the infra management, release management, and all the production operations, change management, and incident management as well. My experience, I'm more attached to the quality and the automation. So I try to bring in whatever I learned in the past to get into the new system and the new role that I'm playing. And my interest, I love game of cricket, which is which is close to the baseball. I'm not sure how many people know about it, but yeah, it's a game of cricket. I follow, I play game of cricket. I love solving Sudoku. I make sure that at least in a day I solve a Sudoku. I collect coins and currencies from different countries. It's been a dull for last 1 year because of no travel, but I love doing that, and I love reading the technology blogs. All right. Okay, so let's get started. So we talk about shift left, shift right, but what is our goal, right? The ultimate why we need to do this, right? Um, so when you talk to someone from business, right, what is their first priority is faster go to market strategy, right? We want to beat our competition. We want to go there for fast. right? We want to be the first one to have this feature, and we want to solve for customers, right? We want to have a better customer experience, right? The customer should feel wow about the features or the services that they are using, right? We also ensure that there's no downtime, there is no the services should always be available, right? And it should work anywhere that you want to use that particular product, right? Irrespective of the region, irrespective of the device, and it should be able to integrate with multiple other systems, right? So that's a need of the hour, right? And so how do you do that, right? So that's coming from business. Then how do you do that from an engineering perspective, right? So you can have a single line of code which can be deployed in production, right? With all the quality criterias are met, and I want to ensure that the feature that I developed is working fine in the production. So that's my success point, right? And how do you achieve that? You need to have automation across your life cycle. I'm not only talking about the test automation, but your infra automation, your dev automation, right? Your release automation. So which is more faster, it is more repetitive, and it's more reliable, right? And you identify the issue early in the cycle so that you move faster, you fail fast, and keep you get a feedback from the production, and then incorporate that in your development cycle, and then you move faster and try to handle those situations which are coming from production, right? So when it comes to a life cycle, right? So every product that you work on, right, has to have some software life cycle that needs to follow. Everyone these days have customized according to the team composition, according to the organization structures. And but most of the time, right, you have your team, right? And nowadays everyone is following agile, a customized agile according to their needs, right? So you follow all the ceremonies of agile. You talk about your daily stand-ups, your backlog grooming, the bugs which are coming from production, the incident you need to handle as part of your sprint. And at the end of the sprint, whatever you develop has to have a meaningful functionality which end user can use, and it can go to production, right? So that's your, a typical left side, where left top corner, right? Your agile development, right? Um, you work with a lot of your teams around product team, the business team, your technology teams, right? Uh, so once everything is finalized, what developer are going to do is they're going to write a code, right? And that code is committed to a source repository system. And from there, we need to ensure that there is a continuous integration is happening. A developer, when he check-ins the code, he or she check-ins the code, it should get deployed in your pre-production and can go to production, right? So you need to have your quality gates as part of your pipeline. The artifacts that you generate should be stored in a location that artifact is certified artifact, right? And how do you measure that is based on the quality metrics that you define as start of your project. That these are the quality metrics that I want to meet as part of my continuous integration, right? And you measure against them, right? Once this phase is over, then the continuous testing starts, right? uh, when the artifact which is certified from the CI/CD from the CI pipeline has to go get deployed on your pre-production infrastructure, right? Then you have your test scripts, you have written your test setup, you've done your test setup, your automation, and you have executed all your tests on those environments, and you are meeting your testing metrics, right? In terms of your test coverage, in terms of your automation, you file all the issues based on the priorities those issues needs to be handled. Again, the if you look at the continuous feedback going back to the continuous integration, and the cycle continues, right? Once the testing is completed, everything goes to the delivery, where your infrastructure is deployed, and this infrastructure is also repeatable, it is configurable, and it is also going through your CI servers, right? And the artifacts which are from the repositories, you provision the infrastructure, you deploy your artifacts, your application, ensure that the user acceptance testing is done and your product is, kind of ready. All the issues you're getting from the production again goes back to your agile development cycle, right? So that's a continuous feedback going in the cycle, right? This is a very nice picture which I have taken it from the internet, and I put the source as well there, right? So which explains how the life cycle should look like, right? So let's get into the details, right? So if you look at, right, what is shift left and shift right testing, right? It's just an infinite loop. There is no beginning, there is no end, and this loop keeps continuing unless you improve your process and keep getting the feedback from one side to another side and just improving on that, right? So we'll talk into the details of each and every aspect of shift left, what happens in shift left and shift right. But there is no end unless there was a waterfall model, right, where there is a start and then there is an end, right? But here it is a continuous the feedback loops going in back into the shift left, and that also gets moved to the right side of it, right? And what we talk about is the continuous quality, right? If you look at the hub and spoke model, right? So if you look at all the aspects of the code, the integration, the testing, infrastructure, deployment, and monitoring, so these are all my spokes, right? And then the center that you see is my hub, which is quality. So irrespective of whatever phase, whatever the activities that you're doing, quality has to be there right from the beginning of the cycle. It is everyone's responsibility to inject quality discipline early in the cycle, right? And the shift left and shift right is going to help us define those quality targets, see how we are doing against those quality targets, are we meeting those quality targets, and then move in the different phases in the pipeline, right? So quality is maintained across all the phases of the development cycle. It could be in the various forms. There are various metrics that we need to define to understand our quality are met. And there are certain things that you'll do manually, certain things you'll do in an automated way. But quality is the key. It is the hub which connects to all the spokes in the hub and spoke model. Right? Um, and it is a continuous life cycle, right? So any new code, every build, every deployment it goes into production, right? A developer should be able to write a code which uh, anytime they should be able to do a integration with their CI cycle and ensure that the code is deployed, right? And we need to enable them with required quality gates. This continuous deployment is happening once the artifacts are created by when the developers are checking the code. It is meeting all the criteria. It's a reliable software. We have to go through all the checks, and then we create a pipeline which will do a deployment based on the configuration, which environment it should go to. It should be based on your branching strategy. It should be based on your environment strategy, right? And then the continuous testing happens at a various level, right? It's a service level, at a component level, at a functionality level, at the end-to-end level. It includes the non-functional aspect, including the performance, security, scalability, and all the aspects, and we'll cover them in detail. And then once it is the continuous testing and the deployment happens, we also need to monitor how our systems are behaving, right? What are the key insights that we get into by monitoring them? We have to monitor our application, we have to monitor our infrastructure, we have to monitor how flows are moving, having from one component to another component, right? And we need to generate a specific set of alerts, right, which will tell you if something is going wrong, if some of the criteria that we define are not meeting, that we have to analyze them, right? And what we do is the synthetic test, right? The synthetic test is how your customers are going to use your system. You try to do the same before they uh, give you the any incident or anything. You identify those aspect and you try to fix them, right? And we'll talk about detail in terms of how synthetic monitoring and synthetic testing is done, right? So we talked about the infinite loop, but actually it is the set of phases and then the feedback going back, right? So what is your assembly line look like, right? We talked about the shift left, we talked about the shift right, right? So these are the various aspects that you need to cover as part of your assembly line, right? Right from the coding till you get the dashboard from the production, right? You need to have your deployments done, you need to have your testing done, you need to test your functionality and the non-functional aspect, based on the location, based on the geographies, based on whether it's a mobile application or a web application. You need to cover all the aspects of it, right? Okay, so let's get into the details of what does a shift left testing, right? So shift left in today's world starts with a developer when it started writing the code, right? How do you enable the quality and the testing when someone is writing a code using their IDE, right? And one of the examples that we have done is we have enabled all the development team by doing the static code analysis, the security analysis, the code coverage on their local machine. So even before they check in the code, everything gets analyzed and ensure that if they meet the criteria, then only code gets checked in. Otherwise, code could be rejected, right? So you can do various checks at the development level. You can do various check at your source code repo. You can do various pre and post check-in actions and maintain that quality is met there, right? You can also ensure that the code is reviewed by a peer, and that code is actually, and all the feedback which is for the code review is been incorporated. Otherwise the code will not be checked in. You should have a traceability, right, where your whatever the code that you're checking, what are the files that you're checking, has to have a Jira ticket or any other the ticket which will ensure that the ticket is available and the requirements are captured there. So you can trace back that the change which has been made for this particular file is going to have impact on this particular functionality, right? You do your static code analysis, your unit testing, code coverage. You have to ensure that your coding guidelines are met, right? There are multiple ways, your styles, your the basic way, so that the code is maintainable, right? Then security, the more that you bring early in the cycle is going to help you, right? Ensure that there are no leakages of passwords being directly mentioned in the code. There's no DB connection mentioned. Everything is configurable, which is outside, and it gets injected at the runtime rather than having at the code level, right? Internationalization, right? Make sure that all if your product is going to support on the various market, various geographies, various languages, you need to ensure that the code is no, there's no hard coded English sentences, right? There's a proper use of the multi-byte characters, right? And how do you do that? It's just by scanning your code, by scanning your schemas, and figuring out, and it could be as part of the pipeline where you have everything coming from the resource bundle, right? Once your artifacts are created, you're using a lot of open source libraries these days. Ensure that those libraries does not have any vulnerabilities, right? So you make sure that you scan them, right, and you package them, right? You package them based on the releases, based on the versioning, based on the configuration where it's going to go. And we also ensure that the secrets are not as part of the package but externally applied at the runtime, right? So this is all part of the shift left, and there are various other aspects also which I have not covered. But overall, in a generic way, this is how your shift left testing should be done, right? Then let's come back to the holistic testing, right? So what are the different types of tests that you want to cover as part of your testing once the left side is happened, right? So you do your synthetic test, which is you're trying to mimic a customer experience in the production, and trying to see if a basic example is if customer is able to log in, right? So every 5 minutes you create a test, may not be create a test user, but you have a provision somewhere in the production that you try to log in with your test user every 5 minutes. Put that script in an automated way, and put that as part of your APM tool, the application monitoring tool, or and then keep executing. And then if that fails, just send out an alert to the production operations team or someone who is on call that yes, hey, login has failed. That's the first thing that a user comes in and does that. So if that fails, that means your entire system may not be usable, right? Is it and you define the alerts based on, is it happening only for a region, only happening for a set of customers, or it's happening throughout, right? So this was just an example, right? So you do your synthetic test in production, right? You carry out your functional test, which is, validation of your functionality end to end as a subsystem, as a component, right? um, you do your load testing, you do your capacity, take care of your scalability, your performance, ensure that all the criterias are met, right? And we'll talk about some of the metrics that we capture as part of the performance testing in terms of what is your API response time. It has to be less than 250 milliseconds. That's the industry standard. What's your the page UI time? It's less than 2 seconds, right? Because from the study, it says that once you have more than 2 seconds to load a page, your user may not get that, your web page may not get attention from your user, right? Once you do the deployment, ensure that all the services that you're deployed are talking to each other. They have the right connectivity to the database, they have the right connectivity to third party systems, right? When you are doing an upgrade, ensure that your previous version is working as expected. Your rolling upgrades are happening properly in your deployment, right? And you do all the validations, your health check of your system. Security testing, very important. You define your threat models, you carry out your penetration testing, right, to ensure that you're secure and you meet all the criteria which are needed from a security perspective, right? And the resiliency testing, which is very common these days, how your system can recover, right, when from a failure, right? That is very important. And I have a slide for that. We'll talk about in detail about the chaos testing, and we'll go into the details. Right. Now, let's come back to. I'm just looking at my time. That how much time do I have? Okay. Um, Shift right testing, right? This is the new concept, right? So it is very important. It's not a new concept, but yeah, many people are doing it, but may not be calling it as shift right testing, right? But it's a continuous feedback which is coming from production, and then you're taking it back to your development and your testing processes, right, during that phase. What happens during the during the shift right testing? You have your heartbeat testing, your health check system, right? You need to ensure that the heartbeat and the health checks are done on a periodic basis for your production infrastructure. All your services, the heartbeat testing and the health checks are happening, right? To ensure that every non PII information is getting logged, right? Which is not sensitive data, which has an expose. Of course, it's maybe logged, but when you are giving it back to the development team, you have to make sure that that is masked, right? You collect all the required information, and then you collect an alerting mechanism based on whatever is logged, right? One of the great example is the failed customer interaction. uh, Whenever customer is getting a 5xx errors, right, you have to ensure that those are some of the errors where your services are not available, and you should just send out an alert immediately, right? And you need to trigger those events. Monitoring, a very critical aspect in the production, the monitoring of the application, monitoring of the infrastructure. How's your performance? You do performance monitoring, right? How is your product or application behaving? Is it meeting your performance guidelines? You have done your performance testing, but that is in a controlled and a performance environment. But it is always good to have a real-time experience because the systems are little different, the users are different, the test data is different. So always get a real-time data and the real data from the production, right? Synthetic monitoring, right? How do you do synthetic monitoring? We just talked about it. You measure your SLAs, you make sure that your benchmarking is done when you're trying to execute the way user are going to execute the function that they're going to exercise in the production, and you try to mimic them and try to identify the incident before customer comes in, right? Disaster recovery, what is your disaster recovery strategy, right? Are you completely on cloud, or do you are you have complete you have a hybrid strategy? Are you completely on prem? what happens when a system goes down? How do you restore it back? What is in case of the disaster, right? So you do a simulation. This is how you're going to do. You can do that in parallel along with your production. You make the production down on the weekend and see if your DR comes up. You do your DR testing, and you can do a completely cutover, right? You can just say the first deployment, I'm going to follow the blue-green deployment. First time I'm going to use my primary, second time I'm going to make my DR as my primary, and then make the primary as my DR, right? So multiple strategies. um, these days, very important, the features, right? You, when you deploy the features, you need to have a configuration where you can enable or disable that particular feature, right? So that based on the customer feedback, either you enhance it, you roll out to the wider set of audience, a wider set of customers, or you want to just stop that feature because it's not behaving the way it needs to be behaving, right? You don't need to do a deployment only to make that make that change. You can do it at a functionality level. You can do an infrastructure during the migration phases. You can have these toggle flags, right? And the fault injection, right? You try to inject a fault in your production system and see how it behaves, right? Does it fail over? Is it robust enough? It handles everything. Does it crash? Right? And it needs to be you know, take care of all the components. If one of the component goes down, does it gracefully exit, right? Does it give you enough information about that, right? So this is mostly around the shift right testing. Just an example, this is how a pipeline that we have built in one of the projects. It starts with a user story. You need to have a, we use Jira, so you need to have a Jira story. The code review needs to happen. There are multiple tools that we used. Unit testing, code coverage, static code analysis, a security scan. We used a globalizer tool for the international and the localization. Then the open source libraries can be used, you know, JFrog, X-ray tool there. We do the infrastructure validation. We ensure that the health checks are met. Then we made sure that there are automated tests. We have a automated monitoring and alerting system. We do the performance testing. We have a toggle flag, a configuration where we can on and off the particular feature and validate. And then we also have a rollback, right? That's one of the critical thing. Once you identify an issue, how do you roll back your system back to the steady state is important, right? Some of the maturity models, some of the capabilities, right? We talked about the production analysis, right? So as a test engineer, if I come to know about what are my mostly hit UI or API or the service call from my production data, that will help me to do focus my testing, the automation on those areas, right? What are my business flows? What are the patterns that I get? What are the workflows that my user executes, right? And I should be able to mimic them in my test environment. What are the user segmentation, right? Where are the users coming from? What time they use our system, right? All the insights that you get it from the production, which you should be able to apply back in your testing cycle and make it more reliable well in the beginning, before you do the deployments, right? Mocking framework is not only used by the development team. How do you virtualize the service, right? How do you ensure that your negative tests are executed where you make sure that the various malformed responses, you should get it from a particular service, so that you should be able to handle those, right? And you should be able to do that only with the mocking service. And then how external integration, if you're going to, you know, have a Facebook integration or a Salesforce integration, how do you mock them within your testing cycle so that you have a component tested, and then you cover them end-to-end testing with, you know, all the system together, right? And test categorization, I think everyone knows about how do you categorize your test so that it relates what your test is all about, and you take a call when you have a shorter release cycle, right? um, One of the key uh, you know information that I always have seen, right? Sorry, we could not test this particular feature because we do not have the same test data as production, right? So how do you solve those issues, right? How do you ensure that your production data is also coming back into your development cycle, right? But there are key aspects that you need to handle, right? You need to ensure that there's a proper masking is done. You classify what is your sensitive data. You need to ensure that there's, if someone understands the masking logic, they should not be able to unmask your sensitive data, because that will lose all the purpose. And once you mask your data, it should be usable, right? I mean, a phone number has to be in a phone number format. A date of birth has to be in the date of birth after the masking happens, right? And you cannot take the entire production data. So how do you segment and take a subset of your production data, right? And on top of it, how do you generate your custom data, use that as a golden copy? And then you need to put this in a pipeline to ensure that this is followed. It's not that you'll do it one time and you always need to have your golden copies created on a regular basis, and mostly in a automated way. All right. Chaos engineering, one of the key aspect, right? Every time you get a question, right? What if scenario? What if this happens? How does my system will behave, right? So what you're trying to do here is you're trying to induce a failure and see how your system behaves, right? It will help us building a confidence that your system can work in production even when you see this kind of failures, right? Some of the examples are, a malform response either from your service or the third party, a sudden increase in the traffic, a latency. How do you induce a latency and see if your timeouts are working properly, right? What happens if one of your dependency system goes down? How your system should, address those? What if there is a memory consumption goes high? What do you do? What happens if your on-prem to cloud network connection goes down? It should inform you. It should gracefully exit. It should give you a proper information, or it should be a self-healing service where if this goes down, you have your backup done, and it should point to that, right? So from a chaos engineering, you need to have a state. You need to define your steady state. What is your steady state looks like, right? And then you create a hypothesis that if this goes down, still my system should going to work, right? And you design. How do you design and implement? How do you induce that particular failure? You learn the results, what happens, right? And the key concept of testing is very important here, because once you define a steady state and you create your hypothesis, what are the tests that you're going to execute when you induce that failure, right? Is going to define what you need to fix, and it's very critical as part of your testing activities, right? Some of the common things which are used in today's world, right? The dark launching. You launch a feature without telling to customer, right? And see how they react to it and how they respond to this particular feature. And then you have your monitoring in place, you have all your logging in place, and then you see a usage of it, right? And your testing also needs to be around it, right? When you introduce this feature without telling customer, how do you test this particular feature? How do you automate them as part of your pipeline, right? Similar to that, the canary testing, where if you are part of some of the migration system, if you are moving from one technology to another technology, right? And we want to compare that your older system and the newer system should work exactly as is, because the end user may not be interested if you are upgrading a version of a Spring Boot service, right? So they would be only interested if there is a change in their experience, right? So as part of the canary testing, you roll out this feature gradually to a subgroup, and then observe how they are being used. A/B testing is one of the key aspect which is being used in today's world, where you give two different variations to a user and see how user responds to those variants, and based on how their responses, you take a call which variant should be going into production to the wider team, right? And all of them is required a thorough testing strategy during your development cycle, as well as during your testing cycles, right? um, and the one of the best practice that that I remember using in one of the projects is test impact analysis, right? So you will have hundreds of features, right? And a developer checks in a code for a particular a file and a feature. How do you ensure that you do a testing around it and you know which features are impacted? Given that it's a small change, you're not going to do all your entire regression cycle for this small change, given the time constraint, right? So you need to be smart. You need to take that risk and assess the impact of that change, and you should be able to identify these are the files, these are the functionality which is impacted. But you need to build a system before, right? And one of the things to build that system is do the code coverage for your functional test, right? When you do an automation or a manual a functionality testing, right, you enable the code coverage, do the instrumentation, and see with the test what are the file, what is the code that is covered by those testing. And then you create a graph out of it, and then you tag saying that with this particular change, these are the functionality and these are the files which are impacted, and you test only those functionality, right? Mocking framework, we already talked about it, right? The different abilities, right, you need to have in your entire SDLC lifecycle, right? Testability, very key aspect. If a developer is writing a code, is that code testable enough? Is there a mechanism, either it's a black box, gray box, or a white box? Are you able to test that particular code, right? um, Accessibility, there are certain guidelines that we need to adhere to from an accessibility perspective. And is your product or application is accessible and usable by as many people as possible, right? Is your application or a product talking to other systems? So you need to have your interoperability metrics created in terms of which version will talk to which version, right? And uh, call out all the dependencies over there, right? Is my software reliable, right? What is the probability of failure free software operation, right? You need to define that in what cases it can fail, and you need to have a strategy around if it fails what happens and how do you fix that, right? Observability, a very key aspect which is now become a default in every production deployments that we are seeing in today's world, right? Without having a knowledge of the code, do you have enough information to look at your system and see that where the failure have occurred? Do you have a traceability of your calls or the events, where it originate and where it ends, so that you can identify where it broke down, which system did not, which service did not it call, or it did not behave as expected, right? Very key aspect, and there are a lot of tools these days along with your monitoring tool to give you this information, right? Scalability, right? How does your system scale when there is an increase in demand during a specific days in a year or during a specific time? I remember working for a US tax software, and we have our peaks, which happens when your W-2s are released, which happens during the Jan to April timeframe, and then again a mini peak happens during the October timeframe, right? For Amazon, it's again the Prime Day or during the the Black Fridays, right? So you need to make sure that you have your the scalability aspect covered, and get back that information from your product team, your production infrastructure, and put that back in your system, right? We talked about the feedback loop, right? So uh, not everything would be automated, but get your customer experience, right? I mean, your voice of customer, what customer talking about your product, right? Get that feedback, and you might find there could be a usability issue, or there could be a production bug the way they are talking about your product, right? Learn from your production incidents, right? Your production incidents will get you lot of additional information, right? Put that back in your feedback loop. Your production alerts, right? Every time you see a 500 or a 5xx or a 4xx, or identify some of the error conditions that you get, and see how you can improve that in your development cycle. Social media feedback and app reviews, right? These are very critical. You work with your product team, understand what is that feedback, something that you can bring it back in your development cycle. Um, yeah, I have probably last 5 minutes. I'll try to cover everything and then we'll see. So some of the metrics, right? I mean, we talked about a lot of quality aspect, right? So metrics gives you an actionable outcome, that something, and some information, some dashboard that you can take an action on, whether it is meeting your criteria or not. So I listed down typical metrics on a very high level. It varies, and I'll give you an example. So these are some of the metrics that we captured, right? If you look at this click to render, it should be less than 2 seconds, right? And these are my product line. Are we meeting those? My APIs, my TP90 should be less than 200 milliseconds, right? My failed customer interaction less than 0.025%, the number of 5xx that I get, right? Availability, mean time to recover, right? The P1, P2 incident. So, and then some of the engineering metrics around test automation, code coverage, code complexities. Your build stability. How many times you've done a build and it failed because of in the quality gates, or it's not behaving the way it needs to be. Right? One of the pipeline case study, I talk about one of the projects that I worked. This is for a mobile application. It just talks about the pipeline and the tools that we used. Some of them are manual, some of them the end deployment happens in terms of the app signing and the certificate, but it goes through all the pipeline we talked about, right? From a source control to quality gates to the deployment and the testing part of it. And that's pretty much it. Sorry, I was rushing a bit, but try to ensure that I cover all the aspect. Feel free to reach out to me on my Twitter, on my email, or on my LinkedIn. I'm available also on the Slack channel. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer, share my experience, and we'll connect from there. Probably one last
Nikhil,
slide.
oh,
Sorry,
yeah,
yeah,
go
one
ahead.
light slide.
Sorry.
Just
No, no, go ahead.
yeah, a lot of tools available in the market, based on some of them commercial, some of open source. It needs to be based on how you define your pipeline, what are the tools which are approved by your company, and how you want to utilize them. So there are various aspects in every phase of the software development cycle, and you should automate it as much as possible. All right, I'm done, Joel.
Sounds good. No, I was saying that it was actually a. I like the fact that it was very, very concrete, and you gave a lot of things. Meaning, I'm thinking if I want to call that a recipe or examples, but it was concrete, and it was ways of people to understand that these are things that we should work on. It's not only a slogan, shift left, shift right, shift whatever. And I liked it because it shows from experience how, yes, a lot of work, but it's worth it. And I did like that part of it. Um, there's a question here that I think it's more about your experience than what you covered in here, but it's interesting still. It's on the chat actually, but I will read it anyways. It says, "Hi, I have a query about test coverage of code. Can you provide more details about automation test code coverage? Because usually speaking, we have code coverage in unit testing by developers. But as a QA or as a tester, how do we measure automation test scripts code coverage?"
Exactly. Yeah,
Um,
this is one of the very interesting topics, and we have done that. We have used a tool called Jacoco, which is a
yeah.
open source tool, and you don't need to instrument a code like Emma or the other tools that we used to use in the past. It will automatically instrument the code at the runtime. So when you do your deployment, right, you need to identify an environment where you do a deployment, and you need to enable Jacoco in that, so that at the runtime, the Jacoco instruments the code. It will be little slower. So this environment you need to only use for a test coverage perspective to get a coverage, and may not be part of your regular testing, because it may impact your there will be a latency for that. We observe that it later. And you can actually do your manual testing. If it's a web application, we actually used to some of the tests which we are not automated, we used to manually walk through all the workflows, and then it used to capture that which piece of the code is getting covered as part of code coverage.
I've used it. I've used that in the past, and the comment that I had is related to what you were saying. It's great to give you an idea, but the problem with JCOCO or the challenge is that the delays that it gives sometimes actually affects the behavior of the system. So your suggestion here, use it for coverage, but then run it without it so that you simulate the real user and not the delay, because it blunders all the synchronization of the code itself. But it is a great tool.
Right.
Yeah, it's a Maven plugin, I think, but yeah.
That's a Maven plugin as well, right? So what we did, Joe, is we used to execute that, but on a separate pipeline, not as part of your regular pipeline. The idea of it is how is my automation coverage look like? I'm not going to fail a build based on my automation, because the whole purpose of it is I want to increase and list down the miss scenarios where I have not a coverage, and I want to add those tests and make sure that those are covered. But I am not going to use that as my failing criteria and as a quality gate criteria to fail the build.
Not only that, I think that, and here we need to put the usual warning about code coverage and about metrics, and that is that it's a great help to know where you have blind spots, but it's
Absolutely.
never going to tell you anything about the quality of your tests or even the stability of the system. It's another indicator. It should be used, meaning it's like counting test cases. Yes, it can help you if you know what you're looking for, but it shouldn't be used blindly, because then it becomes abuse. Just like any metric, I think. But yeah,
Absolutely.
it's
You're
important.
bang on target. Yeah.
Yep.